All right. So I have some stuff here to cover with Databricks, which I think should be pretty fun. And I'm going to dive right into it. And the idea here, again, with this live stream is to get deeper and deeper into doing things with Databricks and get mastery of how that platform works. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And so the first thing that I'll start off with is just going to Azure and logging into it because I'm going to need to use the Databricks Azure connection. And the way I do that is I have it set up here, right here, and Databricks, and we can go to this one, which is the one I want, and I'm gonna launch my Azure environment. Perfect. Now, the big thing to point out with Azure is that if you do want to start to wire things up and talk back and forth with Databricks in your own development environment, one of the things you'll have to do is make sure that you have a cluster running. So I'm going to first go to compute and say, oh, look, single node cluster, data engineering cluster. I need to actually click start, get that thing cooking. Few things to point out about this is that it's running the Databricks runtime version of 10.4, and it'll take just a few minutes to actually get this thing to run. So as this thing is spinning up, a couple other things I'll point out are that if you go to advanced options here, this is very common for people to be confused about. Is that you'll need to know the server host name, which again shows up under advanced JDBC, ODBC, and also the HTTP path, so that you can actually use all that to authenticate to this environment. You also need to have an auth token set up as well. And so if we go through and I go to my environments here and I go to, where is it? Um, let's get rid of that. Let's go to recents, repos. Let's just go back and forth here to see my, I don't know why my don't show again. There we go. That menu options, expand, something. Yeah. Anyway, there's a section that's escaping me for some reason. That you can configure your auth token. They must have changed the UI recently, but in a nutshell, the main thing to be aware of is you need to have this thing running. So now I'm going to go over to GitHub and I'm going to go to an environment that I've got set up that will have Databricks integration, and I'll walk through how that would work. So if we go to Databricks, here, Assimilate-Databricks. What I've got set up here is a high-level overview of what I'm going to cover. So first, we have the Databricks environment where I would have a workspace. I'm sorry, a cluster setup so that I could actually communicate with Databricks. I would then be able to communicate to the management API, which is helpful to do things like, is there a job running, or, can I get some, some data back and forth to the file system, that kind of stuff. And then the other one that's interesting to set up is to talk directly to your cluster and just run commands if you don't want to run it directly into Databricks. Like, let's say you have a GitHub Codespaces environment and you're using GitHub Codespaces, and I don't know, you want to use Copilot to help you write code and all that kind of stuff. So the only thing you would need to do in that particular environment is to actually go to GitHub Codespace secrets and then put in these values: database host, Databricks HTTP path, Databricks server host name, Databricks token, right? We could go through here and hook all that stuff into our particular environments, and that would allow us to synchronize and actually build out the integration. And so if I go back to this environment here, you can see I have a bunch of code examples, and I'll show you where those settings are. So if I go to settings here and I go down to secrets and I go to code spaces, notice here that I have set up repository secrets. Now, I think this is a pretty good process, which is that I go through here and I say Databricks host, and I just put in that host name. I put in the Databricks HTTP path. I put in the server host name. So these are not necessarily things that are that big of a deal to be publicly exposed, but it doesn't hurt to put them into the repository secrets. And then this is actually secret. This is my auth token. And so I can use all of these resources when I launch my code space. So if I go back here and I click on code and we go to psychic space memory and we launch it, this will actually open up the code space environment, and I can actually start to do this communication pathway back with Databricks. And what's really nice about this workflow is that I can actually essentially do all of my software engineering tasks, data engineering tasks directly inside of Databricks without needing to go to my environment. Now, one thing I'm actually going to do real quick that in this particular environment, it says unexpected error occurred. I don't know why that thing's freaking out, but I'm actually going to make one change actually, which I don't know if this is gonna matter here, is that if you go to code space right here, look at this. This is a really cool concept, is because I have some customization in this project, I'm going to select pre-build configuration. And what this will do is it will pre-build the code space so that basically it launches instantly. So I'm going to go ahead and say set up pre-build. I'm going to say for main, and every time I do a push, it's going to actually go ahead and pre-build it. And so if I go ahead and say create, it's going to go through and it's going to get queued. And in fact, I can actually look at the logs as it's actually working. So it's similar in a sense to like code spaces. I'm sorry, to GitHub Actions, where you would go through and run a job. In this case, the job is actually going to be go ahead and configure my environment. And then if there are issues with your environment, like, for whatever reason, you also could get that fixed as well. So we'll go ahead and check this out. Let's go ahead and see everything that it's doing. Okay, it's building our environment here. Now, again, once I've done this, now that I have pre-build set up, it'll always have a fresh environment that's ready to go each time I want to launch it. Which, if I have a lot of complex stuff in a customized environment, this really is pretty awesome. So here we go. You can see it's going to save me whatever 1 minute and 30 seconds, or 1 minute and or a couple minutes every time I launch my environment. It looks like it's almost done. So it's on create template right here. I guess while this is finishing up here, I'll show what this is. So GitHub Codespaces is an environment that allows you to configure it. And what I put inside of here was some customization. So I have a Docker file that shows me what version of Python I'm using. It also has a dev container that allows me to put extensions. In this case, these would be like Copilot, .NET tools, whatever it is I'm going to put inside of this environment. And if we go back to the settings here, and I go to code spaces currently running, I believe that this should be almost done. It's just adding the last package. So some of the stuff is kind of complex, right? Like if you have a lot of software to install, like why not automatically get it working in your environments, so that you don't have to actually do installations or updates when you're running your new environment. I mean, that really is a pretty cool concept, to actually get set up. So let this thing go. It's been running for 3 minutes. Looks like it's almost set up. Now, obviously, this would run automatically, um, every time you make a change, which is I think is the way to go, so that you don't have to wait for it to do all this loading. So this is really, again, saving us the minutes it would take. If I was going to launch this from scratch, it would take me this long to actually run the environment. So it's probably almost done. Let it go for a little bit longer, uploading the template. Anything you can do to save time up front is a huge win. And again, this pre-build is a cool concept. Okay. Create the template. This template was created. That's good. Pre-built template deployed. Registering pre-build template. Uploading pre-build template. So I'm assuming this is very, very close to being done. It is interesting. It shows you each step, how long it took. So I guess the creation took about 3 minutes. The uploading took about 2 minutes. And it's going through the final phase here of uploading that template. And once it's uploaded, in theory, I should be able to just launch this environment and we'll be good to go. And again, the goal, if we go back here, is to get this wired up. So I already have Azure running. In fact, I might as well just go back here and double check that the cluster is running, because that's going to be necessary. Yep, there we go. So I got the cluster running. You can see I have 14 gigs of RAM. We have 14 cores. We have it all set up right here. And I'm going to then communicate with this thing remotely, because this can serve out the file system for me. So if we go to Databricks file system, right, I can actually interact with this file system, grab tables that are located right here, all from the integration from the API keys that I set up right here, and the correct variables. Again, if we go back to here, we go to code spaces. It looks like, is it done? Yeah, there we go. So it's done. So now it should be trivial going forward in the future. Anytime I want to use this code space, it should be instant launch. No weird stuff. Let's go ahead and see if this works. Perfect. Wow, very, very fast. And if I go back to a new terminal, one of the best ways to kick the tires here, if I go back to the top here, would be to play around with the CLI, right? So this is how I would recommend, if you're wanting to test out your integration and you've set all the correct variables up here, what you would want to do is just run this first command and say Databricks clusters list. This will go through and list the clusters. Yep, there we go. So we can see that I'm able to connect to the cluster, which is a good sign. And I also can communicate with the Databricks file system. So that would be the next thing that we would want to do. There we go. Databricks file system. Perfect. And I could even drill down, right? I could go through here and say, okay, well, what's on the file store? Let's take a look, right? Oh, there we go. Look, I have a Stack Overflow survey from 2011. Maybe I want to do some data engineering tasks with that or train a machine learning model, right? I can interact with this. And so I don't have to be wed to wherever Databricks is located. I can essentially use it as a location for doing interrogation, and actually think of it more as like a system for data management versus a development platform. It really depends on what the organizational goals are. And I could also go through here and look at Databricks jobs, for example. Here's another one. Now, the next thing that I would do, um, that would be to scroll down here and say, well, okay, now that I got that working, how can we actually write some code that communicates with Databricks? So I would say that the first thing to do would be to think about the from a management perspective, how could I write some Python code that allows me to use those secrets that I'd set up before, which are Databricks host and Databricks token, and go through here and use those to actually do a similar thing to what the command line tool does. Well, fortunately, pretty easy to do. In this case, you can see I've already got this stuff installed. If we go to requirements file, you can see I have got Databricks installed, Databricks CLI, and then also Databricks SQL connector. And what this does is it allows me to write more like management level Python code, not necessarily query things, but like manage the things. So if I go and I say Python hello Databricks cluster, hello Python hello Databricks cluster. There we go. We can see that it's actually got that cluster information set inside of there. And then the other thing that we can do is if we wanted to, we could actually convert this into like a command line tool, which could be kind of fun. So how would we do this? I would say we could actually move the logic of this into a library. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna grab the entire thing here, and I'm gonna go like this, and I'm gonna go to dblib, which is a directory I have for doing things. And I'm gonna make a new file in here called touch dblib, and we'll call this manage Databricks. That, and I'll paste this inside of here. And the next thing that I would recommend doing is turning this more into a function that actually is something I can reuse. And so what I'll do is I'll just put this into a uh, like a client here. And so we can say, let's make a function here that says, list clusters, right? And we can actually just take this entire thing and and move it over. I always forget if it's Shift V or something like that, or I forget what the command is to shift my code over. We can Google it. Say Visual Studio Code Shift Right. It would be, to move the code to the right would be Edit Shift Right. Edit Shift Right. Let's see here. But is marked as Control. Oh, I see. Control square bracket. Let's try that. There we go. So Control didn't work for me, unfortunately, but I can just shift this over a little bit. Go here, go here, here. We'll put this here, cluster name, and we'll do this. Let's say for cluster in clusters list. something like this. We can say, in fact, this looks pretty good, and we'll just say return clusters list. And so now we have some kind of a library code. So let's say make status format. Yeah, it looks good. Formatted that a little bit. Now all I need to do is import this into a command line tool. So if I say touch and I say CLI manage, say CLI manage Databricks, I can go ahead and launch this and say from lib manage Databricks import list clusters. And then I can also import click. And then I could build I could say build click group here, and we can say manage Databricks. And I can build a command. We'll call this one list clusters, and list clusters command. And that's looks good. And now we can just run it. Perfect, right? So I'm getting a lot of help from Copilot here. And I can also do a shebang line right here. User bin env Python, and then I'll chmod it, chmod plus x, CLI manage, let's run it. We see the help menu says that there's a command called list clusters. And we could even put some help menu info in here and say example, right? And it's going to say Python. You can do this. We can say dot slash, because that's exactly what I'm going to run. And let's run it. Go through here and say list clusters. Perfect. We're able to actually go through and list clusters, right? So I can even build, more tools very, very quickly. And I can commit this. So say get status. Ooh, got a lot of code. Get added. Commit. Adding DB Databricks CLI manage code. So I don't even have to use their CLI. I can just write my own, which is kind of cool. So that's to talk to Databricks itself. But what if I want to query it? Well, pretty easy to do. One of the things that we can look at is some code here that says query DB. And let's take a look at what this does. So it says from Databricks import SQL. So there's a SQL connector that will query existing tables, right? So if we go back here and we see that there is tables here like diamonds, squares, right? These are tables that are available. I can actually just do a select on it. And this could be a huge data set, right? It could be a massive a data set here. If and notice here, I'm using all of those tokens and I'm just returning back the result, but I have the ability to swap out the query. And so now all I need to do is go to a command line tool I wrote earlier, which I believe, is it this one? No, it's going to be this one. So hello query SQL DB. And so what I did is I imported the query DB, and then I built a query command, right? So we can actually put in our own queries. So let's go ahead and run this thing. So I'm going to go /hello query DB help first. It's going to say, okay, look, you can execute SQL queries. Great. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to say CLI query, and I'm going to first do the default here. So let's just run it, and you'll see that it's able to actually talk to that table in Databricks and then query it. Perfect. Now, what if I want to do more, right? Like, what if I want to query more things inside of the Databricks? Well, fortunately, I wrote a reusable tool. So if I go through here and I say query, and I say select star from default diamonds, we could actually say limit and do a bigger limit, right? I can say limit, what about 100? Let's grab 100 rows. And it says, oh, I think I need to put a quotes on this, or else it would be very difficult for it to read. There we go. We quote it. It's going to now send a new command. There we go. We got 100 rows directly from Databricks. I could even do 200 rows, right? And if I wanted to, I could even be super tricky, pipe this into word count, right? I could start piping in Unix tools and start doing other things with whatever it is I wanted to do with Databricks. So there's a lot you can do if you're able to set up the integration, which I did with this Databricks environment and GitHub code spaces. And that's good for today. And thank you for showing up. And I'll see you next week. We can continue to talk about the Databricks machine learning engineering certification.